So there we go. Well, Eric and I are on the same wavelength philosophically, so there'll be some common elements and some new elements. So I'm going to start with just stating a fact that I think you may be aware of, very frightening fact. The United States has $60 trillion in unfunded liabilities, mostly caused by Medicare and Social Security, which are, if they were in the private sector, would be called Ponzi schemes. And the problem is this debt is so high that there's no way of paying it that I can think of. Nobody I've talked to knows what to do. Even inflating our way out of it would be impossible except for devaluing the dollar and betraying everyone in the world who owns dollars. So, and we have, of course, the biggest budget deficit in history, and this unfunded liabilities are getting bigger daily. I think more than $1 billion a day. So my question I'm going to pose, how did we get here? I'm not a banker, so I don't have a solution, but it could represent the destruction of the country. How did we get to this place? So this conference is focused on the master problem. How long do I have? 45. Okay. The master problem of social science is the relation of the individual to society. Now, I believe that this problem is primarily not a social science problem, but a philosophical problem. And because we're talking about what's the right way to organize society, which is a normative question, not a descriptive question. So I'm going to start at the political level, and I'm going to work backwards and then work back forwards to politics. Of course, the central dichotomy at the political level is between individualism and collectivism. And I'll take Ayn Rand as the best spokesman for individualism. Collectivism holds that the individual is subordinate to the group. The group may be the state, the party, the tribe, the race, the religion, etc. Whereas individualism holds that man is a sovereign entity possessing inalienable rights and politically an end in himself, not a means to the end of others. But collectivism and individualism are not philosophical primaries. Politics depends not only on the study of history, as the Founding Fathers did at great length, but also on three prior branches of philosophy: metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. Metaphysically, collectivism, so far as I know, originated from Plato, who held that the individual man was not fully real, but just a reflection of the pure form of man, which was really, in fact, part of a superorganism, the state, or in his case, the city-state. This became, in German philosophy, the organic theory of the state. Its main supporter was Hegel, and John Dewey, mentioned by Eric, was a Hegelian student. So in Hegel's view, the state was the unit of value, but the unit of reality was the real entity. Individuals were not fully real. And it's not a coincidence, all totalitarian states subscribe to and depend on collectivism, with an elite group deciding who shall be sacrificed, when and how, through war, suicide missions, what kind of work they'll be forced to do, or what kind of families they'll be forced to have, how many children, who they'll marry, and the like. In contrast, metaphysically, individualism holds that based on direct sensory perception, that only the individual is a real entity. You can see that by simply looking. Groups of any kind are abstractions. They're integrations of a group of individuals bound together by common values, common purpose, or a common geographical location. So a group is not really an entity, it's an abstraction based on integrating a bunch of individuals into a mental unit. Now, epistemology being this nature of knowledge, according to collectivism, each person's mind is determined by social influences. We are passive products of society. Truth is collective agreement. And if you go all the way to postmodernism, truth is a social creation. And they mean this literally. It's created by our minds, not discovered. And there's no such thing as a truly individual mind or even an objective truth. The source of this, by the way, philosophically was Immanuel Kant, who was the first philosopher to openly declare that reality was unknowable by the mind. The noumenal world wasn't knowable, only the phenomenal world. Individualism, in contrast, holds that man is autonomous in that he possesses a rational mind and the volitional control over the use of that mind. So he's not a passive product of society if he chooses to think, but has the ability to judge what is given and reach independent conclusions through reason. So to quote Ayn Rand on this, there is no such thing as a collective brain. There is no such thing as a collective thought. An agreement reached by a group of men is only a compromise or average drawn upon many individual thoughts. It's a secondary consequence. The primary act, the process of reason, must be performed by each man alone. No man can use his brain to think for another. All the functions of the body and spirit are private. So that's epistemology. Now let's turn to ethics, which is concerned with the nature of the good. Collectivism is based on the moral code of altruism. And I have to take issue with previous speakers who have included in this term any form of helping others. The real meaning of altruism, a term founded by a French philosopher, Auguste Comte, was the sacrifice of the individual to others. In fact, altruism means literally otherism. Again, Immanuel Kant was a pioneer in this. And let me read some quotes from Kant. I'm not even quoting the worst things that he said in the realm of values, but here are some of them. Capitulation to self-love represents a wickedness, the wickedness of the human heart, which secretly undermines the moral disposition with soul-destroying principles. The principle of one's own happiness is the most objectionable of all, a radical evil in human nature. And the alternative for Kant was self-sacrifice, which couldn't even be for the purpose of going to heaven. He was trying to protect religion from reason in his writings. The true proof that you were engaging in moral action is to live in eternal and unbearable suffering out of duty, with no hope of gain even for going to heaven. That was pure sacrifice. So he could be called although the sacrifice in the Bible, the term altruism was never used. So his was an ethics of duty. Now, there's a seductive package deal, as I said, in the term altruism. Included in the same category by most people are real altruism, which means self-sacrifice, as Comte defined it, and any form of helping others, which can be for many, many self-interested reasons. The best example would be, why would you drive your wife to the hospital when she's sick? Because you love her. Why would you spend a large amount of your savings for an operation when you could use the money to go to the Caribbean and have a great vacation because you love her more than the money? So it's a terrible distortion to bring in the same category genuine altruism, which is self-sacrifice, and doing things for others out of a personal interest. There's lots of selfish reasons, which you can ask later, for helping others, but according to Ayn, it's not a duty, but it's something you would do if you have a self-interest in the process. Now, individualism, in contrast to altruism, is either openly or by implication egoistic, because it would say man is an end in himself and his own happiness is his highest moral purpose. And the individual is the unit of value because the individual is the unit of reality. A group isn't a unit, it's an abstraction composed of separate individuals. Again, in the field of egoism, there's a huge package deal. In the same category, people put the rational pursuit of one's own interest through independent, voluntary action with others, along with hedonism, subjectivism, Machiavellianism, narcissism, egotism, being boastful and conceited, amoralism, criminality, and narcissistic aggrandizement. Now, the purpose of this package deal is the same as the package deal in altruism. It's to obliterate critical distinctions. In the case of altruism, it's to obliterate the distinction between self-sacrifice and helping others for selfish reasons. And in the case of egoism, it's to obliterate the distinction between rational, honest trade with others for your self-interest versus vicious, amoral exploitation or harming of others. And Ayn Rand's great discovery was to show that self-interest was objective, that it had to involve thinking, and the reason people go wrong in this field is most people think self-interest is just acting on their feelings of the moment, and that doesn't work. You have to think in order to decide what's in your self-interest. So she argued that rational egoism was not just okay, it was morally good. It was a moral virtue to act in your self-interest and a great achievement to achieve your own personal happiness if you used reason and didn't violate the rights of others. For the same reason, she considered altruism in its actual meaning to be morally evil, because it meant self-immolation, the destruction of your mind, your body, yourself, your happiness for the sake of others. Now, back to closing the circle to politics. In politics, under collectivism, the self is dispensed with as having no moral status. And as I mentioned, all totalitarian states are based on altruism, that it's your duty to serve the group, and if you don't do it voluntarily, you will be properly forced to. And all forms of socialism are based on altruism, as you must serve the state, not yourself. Individualism in politics means the possession of individual rights, which means your life belongs to you and you have the total freedom to act according to your own judgment for your own interest as long as you don't violate the rights of others. Applying this to economics means capitalism. And your rights can only be violated in a trade if the trade isn't voluntary, if one uses physical force against you, or fraud, which is an alternative form of force. Why is this evil? Because force negates your means of survival, your rational mind. And answering your question earlier, Ayn Rand thought religion was actually harmful to man. And for one basic reason is that it put faith as a primary in the most important issues of your life, your philosophy. And she believed reason was the highest moral virtue. And therefore, since it's incompatible with faith, she was opposed to all forms of religion. Now, what about contemporary so-called democracies? In the Greek view, of course, democracy meant unlimited majority rule. And the Founding Fathers studied these issues. They looked at the Greek state. They looked at tyranny of the one. They looked at tyranny of the few. And they looked at tyranny of the many. And they declared there were disastrous problems with all of those. And they explicitly rejected democracy as a proper form of government because it didn't protect the individual against the mob. So they founded a constitutional republic in which people could vote, but they couldn't violate your rights under the Constitution. Now, what's happened to the concept of rights since the Founding Fathers? Its meaning has slowly been changed to something the opposite of what it was. Rather than the right being your right to pursue happiness and the right to pursue values, it's become to mean, it started to become to mean the right to get what you want, not to pursue what you want, which has to entail the actual destruction of rights, because if you're guaranteed to get what you want, it has to be taken from someone else by violating their rights, taking their money, and giving it to you. So these current democracies we have in the Western world are combinations of egoism and altruism, collectivism and individualism, capitalism and socialism. But because these are contradictions, these are states which you call states of unstable equilibrium, or I would say unstable disequilibrium. Because of the contradictions, how do you draw the line? Where do you stop? If you have unlimited needs and limited money, because production is always limited in amount, but unlimited needs and limited demands for things, how do you stop? Where do you draw the line? And there is no answer to this. So to go back to my original question, how did we get in this state where we owe $60 trillion, which we cannot pay, which there's no way to pay, which may end up bankrupting the country? I don't know what will happen. It's going to be bad. I believe it happened because of altruism. People believed that it was the only moral thing to do is to satisfy as many human needs as possible in unlimited fashion, so the spending kept going and going and going and going, but there was no way to limit it. So now the spending is way, way above what can be paid. So I don't think bad economics was the primary, and I think it was bad ethics. And the error in making altruism the highest moral virtue has led to, in economics, the bankruptcy of our country. When it will actually play out, nobody knows, and what they're going to do about it, nobody knows. Now, since, how much longer do I have? 15? I want to do a little, and since this institute is about leadership, I want to talk a little bit about leadership. I believe leadership should be selfish. You read in the paper that the bad leaders fail because they have big egos. And I actually wrote a book in which I discussed this called The Prime Movers, Traits of the Great Wealth Creators. The egoist is usually a person like the following. He gives orders and expects them to be obeyed without question. He hires yes men. He orders changes to be done, which might be a contradiction to what happened last week. He puts himself in the news through PR. He has a trophy wife with lots of jewels. He makes sure he has the huge salaries which have nothing to do with the earnings of the company. He has spies, so he can blame others when something goes wrong and takes credit when everything goes right, even though he didn't cause it, and so on and so forth. So a big ego is actually a flagrant irrationalist. And big egos of this kind, which I call inflated egos, are people who fail. Their companies are destroyed eventually, and their careers and reputations are ruined. So what would genuinely selfish leadership be? Well, back to Eric's point, it's not just doing what you want. You have to decide what's actually in your self-interest as a leader. So what would that be? I'm going to do this quickly so there'll be time for questions. Choose a career that you selfishly love. Making products you selfishly love. Have a firm code of values which guides everything your company does. A firm code of moral values. Now, if you want an example, there's one in your backyard, BB&T, banking conglomerate in North Carolina. It's all up and down the East Coast. There's BB&Ts all over town. It uses Ayn Rand's value system as guide. They've had steady growth for over 25 years. They've never had a scandal, and they never bought any subprime loans. Because they used reason to decide whether those were good investments. And they decided that was a stupid thing to buy, and they never gave any subprime loans because they thought it was stupid to give customers loans they could never repay. Hire a competent management team, including people with knowledge you don't have. Develop a rational competitive strategy. Select employees who share your moral code. BB&T people have to go through a draconian selection process done by another company before they even get hired. If they don't accept the BB&T values, they're fired. Foster communication in all directions. Why? Because reason says nobody is omniscient. Motivate subordinates. First you select people who are motivated, then you use goal setting, recognition, pay for performance. You appeal to the subordinates' self-interest in rewards. If you do well for us, we will do well for you. That's a trade. So individualism, and why would a subordinate want to work for the company if they're egoistic? Because doing well for the company does well for their career, for their bonuses, for their promotions, for their experience, for their ability to get jobs elsewhere. It's in their self-interest, if it's a rational company, to work to make the company succeed because it helps them to succeed. So the only social responsibility of business is, in my mind, to make an honest profit through voluntary trade without violating anyone's rights. There can be many selfish reasons why a company would donate to various causes. You can ask me about BB&T later if you want. But their primary responsibility is to make an honest profit long-term through honest practices by trade. And this selfish pursuit of profit is considered morally good, morally admirable, if it's earned honestly. So what then is the greater good and how to achieve it? The greater good under individualism means the good of each individual left free to function as long as they don't violate the rights of others. This will lead to prosperity, but is not the justification for it. The justification for it is the individual is sovereign and owns his own life. Those who get in trouble in a free society would have to rely on voluntary charity, but would not have the right to pick their neighbor's pocket to fulfill their needs. And if you want to ask me in the question period, why would you donate to a charity? I'll give you several answers. So I'm going to stop there and open the floor to questions. Yes.
If you're in a screwed up economic political system like ours, where people aren't held responsible for their decisions, wouldn't it make sense to be egoistic in the bad sense? As opposed, when you said the egoist in the bad sense thinks he's maximizing self-interest, but he really isn't. He's not going to be successful in the end. But as it turns out, it looks like you can be fairly irresponsible and pursue your own self-interest and then wind up doing okay. I mean, you can't go as far as Madoff or others, but lots of individuals seem to get away behaving egoistically in the bad sense and still maximizing their self-interest.
Well, it's a no-win situation in a mixed economy because the government, because of the Supreme Court rulings, the government has literally unlimited power over the economy. The Supreme Court has made it clear there's nothing the government can't do to you as if you're in business or own property. There's nothing they can't do to you if they pass a law saying it's okay. So it's a kind of a no-win situation, but the real solution for objectivism is that philosophy drives history, and our problems are philosophical. And BB&T's biggest contributions have been to start programs now at 60 universities to have courses in the moral basis of capitalism, because she believes the conservatives are a complete failure because they try to defend capitalism based on pragmatism, which does not work. Ayn Rand said, morality is the greatest of all intellectual powers. And the reason the conservatives lose is because they don't give capitalism a moral basis, which Ayn Rand does. So she thinks the long-term best thing to work for is to change the cultural values of the cultural philosophy. And I'll tell you personally, my biggest donations, I give donations out of self-interest, my biggest donations by far are to the Ayn Rand Institute, because they are the ones I think that can save us from destruction if it's not already too late. So my view would be as honest as you possibly can, realizing that if you're in business, you're dealing with politics all the time, and you've got to make the best deal you can, but I don't advocate swindling people. Yes, there's a microphone needed down here.
Thank you. This is all very admirable and very elegant kind of system, I think, conceptually and philosophically. However, I don't think it's very realistic in terms of, people don't operate on rational bases. They operate on emotions and motivations, and not everybody is moralistic. If you could make everybody a moralistic and you could make everybody rational, that might work, but that's not reality. The reality is that you're always going to have people that are predatory, that don't share the same moralistic premises. I mean, there's no way to convince everybody in a society to adopt the same moral principles. There's always going to be a wide diversity. And the problem is that some of that diversity includes predatory individuals and others. And if you're not going to, and they're not going to be convinced by your arguments, by rational arguments, because they have a different emotional basis, a different agenda, different interests, etc. And under those conditions, I can't see how this system would work at all.
Okay, good question. Now, it's true that many people today are not rational and don't act on good principles, but and it's also true that in the most perfect objectivist society, there would be criminals. I'm not naive, of course there would, but they wouldn't be primaries. They wouldn't be destroying the society. Now, but the real question is, why aren't people rational? And you have to go back again to philosophy. Since Immanuel Kant, there's been a steady assault on reason by every single philosopher until Ayn Rand. And the bankruptcy of modern philosophy comes with postmodernism, which says that you can't know anything. All knowledge is impossible. That's the dead end of the Kantian revolution. So we believe that the first thing you have to revive in society is the validity and efficacy of reason. And you also have reason being destroyed by the school system. It's terribly destructive. The public school system, I think, is basically a failure. The government has a monopoly, a virtual monopoly, not 100%, but virtual monopoly, in the teachers' union, and they're against merit, they're against everything that's good. They even were against, for many years, phonics, and destroyed the people's ability to read. So the public press really reflects the current philosophy. So they're just mouthpieces, they're not innovators. So we believe to change society, you have to change its basic philosophy. I think people at the time of the Founding Fathers were much more rational than they are now. But think of the terrible things we get taught every day by the media, by television, books, and the like. It's all anti-reason. So I think if you revive reason, you spread good ideas philosophically, they would spread to other fields. Everyone wouldn't accept it, but enough people would that you'd have a way better society. And the criminals and irrationalists wouldn't harm anybody in the end but themselves. They wouldn't have the political power to destroy everyone else. They'd have limited power. So to me, it's a long-term solution. It's not a short-term, it's a long-term goal. And that's why we fight for changing the culture's philosophy without being naive about that everyone will be rational. But most bad decisions are made in people's lives today, or for the very reason you said. They rely on their emotions without understanding their emotions, without using reason, because they think reason is ridiculous. And as long as they hold that view, we're in bad trouble, but we believe that can change.
I have very different views,
Okay.
but I don't think we're ever going to come to an accommodation here.
I just wanted to say a word for religion here. Listening to both of these talks, I couldn't help think about the Protestant ethic and Weber's notion of self-interest, and it seemed to me that he distinguished between self-interest and greed, and that was his notion of what was behind capitalism, and so perhaps there's more in common with Protestantism than in your conception of self-interest than we heard. And and the follow-up is that in the idea of one not knowing what is in one's own self-interest sounded a little bit like an individualist version of Marxist false consciousness, in a way that, that Marx and Lenin always argued that the reason the working class didn't commit revolution was because they didn't know what was in their real interest. They suffered from false consciousness for one reason or another.
With one difference, that Marx thought the solution was to force people at the point of a gun to do the right thing. We don't. So, yes, we believe people would be mistaken, but we wouldn't force them at the gunpoint to do what's right. Now, in terms of Protestantism and the Weberian hypothesis, it may be true that Protestantism was indirectly beneficial by making the individual more important, but I think it was for the wrong reason, because what did it say? You can be saved by making money, and that proves God selected you, but that's not a rational reason for making money. The rational reason for making money is you love your work, you love the process of production, and you want your just reward for it. And I think trying to justify it on a mystical basis is really undermines reason. So you could say maybe Weber helped capitalism, but for the wrong reason. But Ayn Rand thought religion was harmful to the individual, and especially because of the faith-reason dichotomy. And secondarily, because even though it wasn't in the Bible, self-sacrifice is very fundamental to Christianity. You won't find anywhere in the Bible anything about reason being a virtue. I don't think there's a single passage that ever says reason is good. What is good? Obedience. Don't you dare disobey. Blind obedience to an authority figure. So she was totally opposed to that approach. And what was the highest moral virtue? Well, you have, the commandments, but if you want to look at the basic symbol of morality, it was God sacrificing his only son to save mankind, which makes no sense, but let's say, even if it does, that sacrifice was the greatest thing a Christian could ever do. So it's the opposite of pursuing one's self-interest. So for those two reasons especially, she thought religion was harmful to men. Now, she thought religion tried to satisfy a genuine human need, which is the need for a philosophy of life. She thought everyone needs a philosophy. If you don't get it consciously, you get it by osmosis, and most people's philosophies are subconscious mess of contradictions and half-digested concepts. But religion tried to answer a genuine human need, a coherent to them philosophy of life dealing with metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, indirectly politics. But she believed that it failed because it taught the wrong philosophy. So she thought her philosophy was a philosophy of reason, which was pro-man's life. The Christian philosophy was, in effect, inimical to man's life, even though it posed a genuine need. And of course, what you have in the culture today, what choice do you have today in the culture? You have Christianity and you have modern skepticism, mainly pushed by college professors. Now, given the choice between the two, I don't blame people for choosing Christianity, because at least it's something, and skepticism is nothing. So objectivism is trying to offer a third alternative. We're a very small minority, but we're working on it. Yes. I think the lady in back was first.
Thank you. Thank you. You criticize Kant in your paper, and well, I don't deny that he's a defender of self-sacrifice and all that. But yet, Kant was the one who placed morality inside the individual, and depending on each one's personal moral maxim. Remember his first moral law, he says that one should act according to our own personal maxims as if it was a general or universal law. And I think that as if is very important, because is to acknowledge that the moral law is not a collective duty or a collective rule, but one that derives from our own individual appreciation of what we wish, or each one of us wishes, would be a general and collective behavior. So wouldn't you think that for modernity, Kant plays the moral action in the individual?
Okay, you're talking about a different aspect of Kantian philosophy. That was that you should think in principles. Basically, that was what you meant. Now, the problem with thinking in principles is a good thing, and Ayn Rand believed in thinking in principles too, but the question is, what's the content of virtue? Now, for Kant, it was duty ethics, and proven most convincingly by living your life in unbearable suffering, and that valuing yourself was the most wicked of human evils. So, okay, he had a principle, but you can't divorce the principle from the content of what he asked people to do. And Ayn Rand believes in principles too, but the content of what she thought people would do is completely the antithesis of Kant. So to me, when you get content like Kant urged, it's meaningless to say I'm good because I defended principles, if they're the principles that are destroying of the human spirit and human happiness, which he did. So that's the problem. Let's see who's next.
I got distracted earlier in your talk and by the former one too, so I probably missed a lot about the claim that groups and the collective are mere abstractions. And I agree that something, when we talk about the common good, or we talk about something that's somewhat amorphous like the public health, does seem somewhat abstract. But do you think it's equally abstract to be an army or a church or a corporation that seem to have emergent properties, rights and responsibilities and capabilities that go above and beyond the sum of the individual rights, the individual responsibilities, and the individual capabilities?
Well, whatever those units do is always chosen by individuals who speak for or are part of those organizations. So even though they are valid abstraction, because there is such a thing as a group, this group here is a group, but as soon as people leave, the group disappears. The individuals remain as individuals, and they're real separate entities. The corporation is really a legal entity, but that doesn't make it a literal metaphysical entity. It's a legal entity based on historical business law, but it's still composed of individuals, and individuals in it make decisions on the part of the organizations, and if they left, there would be no organization. So I still consider them abstractions. And I'm not consider, they're not wrong abstractions, they're valid abstractions, but they're still abstractions. The individual is the real unit of reality, and the validation is direct perception. You can see in this group, it composed of each one of you. Once they disperse, that unit for now disappears. The individual units remain because they're the real units. They're the real entities. So you have to be very careful when you're talking about the decision of an organization. You can talk about that metaphorically, but what it actually means is the decision of certain people who speak for the organization. That's what it literally means, but it's okay to use the term metaphorically, or when you say the group decided on this course of action, what you mean is the individuals in the group together agreed on a certain choice. But there's no group mind. Our minds are not interconnected, so it's still metaphorical. And it's a legitimate use as long as you hold in mind that it's metaphorical.
Would you argue that the many Americans who recently donated to Haiti were behaving immorally?
No. We donated to Haiti. Now, why would we do that? Because we don't live there, we have no relatives there. Why would we possibly do it? The first thing to do when you're talking about charity, and Ayn Rand had a whole article about this, first of all, you have to consider what you can really afford based on your circumstances. So you shouldn't bankrupt yourself to give money to Haiti or take away your children's shoes or their education. But do you have extra money you can afford? Yes, it's legitimate to give to certain kinds of charities. Now, what's the benefit? Why would you give to Haiti? I would say in this case, it's simple goodwill. It's simply goodwill because you value life and you know other people value their lives. And you feel great sorrow for such a great tragedy. Now, would I donate to every possible disaster that happens in the world every day? No. I would limit myself. I give most of my money to the Ayn Rand Institute. I give a much smaller amount to Haiti, but it's pure goodwill. Goodwill for the nature of human life and suffering, and it's just such a sad thing. The most interesting part of that, in a way, to me, is the greatness of living in an industrial civilization. Because when things happen to us, we have the capacity for fairly effective recovery. When things happen to fairly primitive societies, they have no means to cope, and they're just completely helpless. And of course, the real solution is to figure out some way they could develop into more advanced civilization. I don't know much about Haitian culture, but it's a very sad kind of case. But it's not, I don't consider it my duty to give to Haiti. It's just plain goodwill, and my goodwill is limited. I don't give to every possible organization in the country, of which there are tens of thousands. So this was sort of a special case. The saddest thing about Haiti, which is, I guess, more a military thing, is the slowness, because of their primitiveness, the slowness with which the aid got there. It's unbelievable how long it took. I was thinking the president could order parachutes the first day, send parachutes of food and water at random throughout the city. They didn't do it. They said, we've got to wait for the roads to be cleared. Well, that was like a week. Even parachute in medics, they didn't do it. So it's kind of tragedy that wasn't even an effective. There's hundreds of millions of dollars given. It's not even being used effectively, which is sad. But anyway, so my view of charity is, first of all, can you afford it, and is it a cause that means something personally to you, and you give proportionately to that. And it can be abstract causes, like maybe you love. Maybe your mother died of cancer, and it was great suffering. It caused you great pain. Why would you give to cancer? You'd love for that to be cured because you know how much it hurts a loved one. It's got a personal meaning for you. But you might not give to Haiti because the cancer means more to you. You give your money to the cancer. It has more personal meaning. So it's got to be something that has something that means something to you personally, not out of a duty ethics.
There's no request. Thank you, Dr. Locke. Something to chew on.
Thank you.